of ways is my colleague, next door neighbor, Amy Koehlinger. Amy came to Oregon State in 2012, do I have that right? Yeah, okay.
2 beautiful years.
She works in North American religious history, American Catholicism, and religious embodiment, which she'll talk a bit about tonight, obviously. Her first book was called The New Nuns, Racial Justice and Religious Reform in the 1960s. That came out in 2007, was a prize-winning book publication, and she's currently working on a manuscript or a book called Rosaries and Rope Burns, Boxing and Manhood in American Catholicism from 1890 to 1970, and that's sort of forms the context for her presentation this evening.
So one of the interesting things about having 3 speakers side by side is that we're all looking at religion and athleticism, and we're all doing it in different sports from very, very different perspectives. So what I appreciate about John's comments is that he's thinking so much about the actual embodied experience of athletes, which I'm going to provide a more theoretical paper for thinking about how sport and religion fit into the larger study of religion as a field. But one of the things I'm going to argue is that one of the things that scholars don't pay attention to is actually the embodied experience of athletes. So John, your comments are so helpful to me in thinking about this because they grow out of your embodied experience. It's exactly where I want the field to go. My comments are more theoretical in framing, mostly because this is part of this really exciting series on religion and embodiment, on healings and hurtings, and we have some of the best thinkers about that who are visiting campus this term. So I wanted to put the field of religion and sport inside this larger conversation about religion and the body to kind of show where it fits in with the other conversations we'll be having all term. So that's what I'm going to talk about. So for me, one of the pleasures of doing background research for the book I'm writing on sport and boxing, religion, is the chance it offers to read existing literature on intersections of religion and sport. And I've developed a pretty good sense of the field that I can sum up quite simply. There's good news and there's bad news. So let's go with the bad news. I always start with bad news first because then we can redeem it. The study of religion and sport is really marginal to the academic field of religious studies right now. It's not a central focus. At best, it's viewed by the field as a topic for dabblers and sport aficionados, and it holds little relevance for the central conversations in the academic field that should be its natural home. So those of us who love sport know that I think we often feel like our interests are marginalized in the various academic fields we have. At worst, there's a perception that scholars of of religious history that religion and sport is unserious. It's an outlier and it merits its marginal status. It's just not very serious. But this unflattering portrait approaches religion and sport. It's harsh, but it's not entirely undeserved. Academic analysis of religion and sport has failed to develop alongside its foundational disciplines. It kind of earned its marginal status. And instead, scholarship on sport and religion has hewed very closely to the analytical perspectives that are at the origins of religious studies, and it employs theories, approaches, interpretive paradigms that have been largely discredited in the field of religious studies. And this is one of the problems, is that it's not keeping pace with theories in the field of religion. That's the bad news. We're marginal and we kind of have earned it. The good news, the rigorous academic study of sport is relevant to the study of religion if we start to think about sport and religion in new ways. Religion and sport has the potential to illuminate important facets of religious experience, from the construction of gender to physical experiences of pain and ecstasy, from attitudes about the human body to the cultural institutions that regulate boundaries, gestures, and activities. The study of religion and sport has the potential to make important contributions to materialist turns in religious studies, feminist philosophy, cultural studies, right? There's a materialist turn happening in lots of places, because it provides data about the relationship between embodied experience and religion, exactly the kind of thing that John was talking about. For that to happen, though, the study of religion and sport has to move from the margins to the center, and scholars interested in sport need to re-enter disciplinary conversations about theories of religion with our methods and our interpretations renewed and refreshed, I think. So the study of religion and sport, if you trace the history of where did people start thinking about religion and sport, it starts with Michael Novak's brilliant and ebullient The Joy of Sports. This is a book that a lot of people know very well. And Novak's work serves as a central foundation for anybody who wanted to write about religion and sport, and often people who still do now refer to Novak's book. But Novak's book is a pretty weak intellectual foundation. So writing from the mid-1970s, Novak characterized sport as a quote-unquote natural religion. This is the kind of phrase that makes religion scholars now kind of cringe inside, the concept that there is some natural or innate religion. But he argued that, quote, sports flow outward into action from a deep natural impulse that's radically religious, an impulse for freedom, respect for individual limits, a zest for symbolic meaning, and a longing for perfection, unquote. So Novak collapsed sport and religion into a single entity by mapping what we call isomorphic tendencies, things that are similar in religion and sport. So saying sport has these things, religion has these things, because they both have the same things, the same elements, they are one and the same thing. Because sport and religion has ritual and myth and institutions and sacraments and ceremonies and martyrs, you can say that sport and religion are one and the same. Second, Novak argued that sport performed the same function as religion in human culture. So both sport and religion mark out special times and places, right? There's Super Bowl Sunday, and there's the stadium here on campus. They're separate from ordinary. Religion and sport explore questions of ultimate meaning. They provide dramas through which human beings interpret large frames of meaning. In Novak's words, quote, sports recreate symbols of cosmic struggle in which human survival and moral courage are not assured. So he's saying when we watch a good football game, we're watching the essential human moral struggle being enacted. Novak argued that sport, like other forms of religion, satisfied the deepest perennial needs of the human spirit. This is why we like it so much. Quote, they satisfy the most persistent hungers of the human heart. I actually really like that, persistent hungers of the human heart. For repetition, for ritual, for pageantry, and for uncertain outcomes. And for centuries, human beings have gathered so. Now, my experience of this is that it's a really emotionally satisfying way of thinking about sport for those of us who love sport. There's something intuitively right, if you love sport, about the things that Novak says. But it's really deeply problematic as an intellectual foundation. It rests on universalist claims about human nature and human desires that are blind to historical specificity, so we all want these dramas, he's saying. It generalizes all sport based on his favorite sports. His favorite sports are basketball, football, and mostly baseball. He's a baseball nut. And so he thinks of all sport in terms of these traditionally American mainstream sport. It lumps all religious traditions into one undifferentiated category. There's just religion for Novak. And in short, Novak offered a really deeply flawed foundation for work on religion and sport. And that's why we have now a marginalized position. A lot of the scholarship that grew out of this on religion and sport utilized this equation of religion and sport. Religion and sport are the same thing that Novak proposed. And most of the works of the last 20 years use some formulation of Novak's equation, and they may finesse it by calling religion in sports scenes either cultural or civil, right? So cultural religion or civil religion or folk religion before the term religion. So they qualify it, but they still say the same thing. So although the model of sport as cultural or civic or folk religion is central to the analysis, it's more nuanced than Novak's original formulation. These books still too often approach the conflation of sport and religion as a reality that we can observe easily, rather than as something that needs to be constructed and situated. It's an interpretive mode, and that these assumptions are embedded with ideologies that we need to look at. Steve Bruce put it this way. He says, quote, examining the parallels between football and religion can be interesting and illuminating, but it's not helped at all by defining football as religion. To do so is to establish by definitional fiat what should be demonstrated factually. So the sport as religion model has something to be proven through case studies rather than as an explanatory trope we can just go through. So while civil religion approach is increasingly careful to provide explanatory foundations for the equation of religion and sport, its evolution solves only one of the major problems that's central to Novak's formulation, and this is the unstable foundation that the field of religion and sport rests on. There's two other significant flaws that we need to look at. One is the equation of sport and religion draws from antiquated theories of religion that have been largely critiqued and then abandoned by the field of religious studies as religious studies has become more reflexive about its own history. And two, the scholarship examines the role sports plays in the lives of people in the stands and the stadiums, giving meaning to their lives, rather than looking at players on the field, track, court, ring, ice, and river, I guess we'd call it. And this implicitly privileges the perspective and experience of spectators and fans and elides that of athletes and players. Okay, so there's two, again, remaining problems, and the two problems are interrelated. Novak and many of the sportist religion scholars drew on and occasionally explicitly evoked theories of religion that emerged from the very early origins of religious studies in Protestant theological circles, particularly the work of Rudolf Otto and Mircea Eliade, both of whom approach religion as an absolute reality, or the numinous in Otto's term, that humans briefly access in moments of hierophany in Eliade's formulation. These are two very early theorists of religion. Since the 1980s, the collective work of Talal Assad, Jonathan C. Smith, Bruce Lincoln, and Russell McCutcheon, just to name a few, have effectively intellectually delegitimated this approach to the study of religion, although Stuart and I have ongoing debate about Eliade and his usefulness. But they've replaced this model with models that recognize the constructedness of the category of religion, its colonial legacies, and the situated interpretive perspectives of the scholars. So we can no longer just stand and say there's this thing called religion and all people experience it, it stands outside of us. This unreflective reliance on Otto and Eliade in studies of religion and sport orients analysis towards revelation, symbolism, and meaning making, the view from the stands, what people in the stands see, rather than practice, experience, and embodiment, which is the experience of actual athletes who are on the field or on the river. The result is scholarship that's quite good at using metaphor to argue that sporting fans encounter transcendent meaning in their devotion to sport, but it has no theoretical capacity to consider sport as, and here's a list of things it can do, a system of production and consumption, that's David Chittister, a discipline of the body, that's Foucault, a somatic form of discourse, that's Ong, or as embodied experience, that's Tom Sortis, who will be coming here next week. And it's precisely these kinds of analysis that are at the center of the scholarly conversation in religious studies at the present moment. So if we fail to take seriously the new developments in how we think about what religion is, we can't think effectively about what religion and sport is, and that conversation remains marginal. In order to contribute to the ongoing scholarly conversation in religious studies then, or to be taken seriously, scholars studying religion and sport need to take seriously the theoretical developments in the field that problematize the central analytical modes for writing about religion and sport. We need to critically engage with the category of religion and change our gaze from the spectator to the athlete, from abstract meaning to concrete human bodies. And that's why I'm so happy about this series and the way that it's focusing continually on bodies and how we think about bodies. If scholarship on sport and religion reorients itself in this way, it will contribute to a vibrant conversation that's emerging among religion scholars representing diverse subfields about materiality and the study of religion. And here I have to nod to Manuel Vazquez, who was here just last week, because in his book, he challenges scholars to move beyond models that approach religion as texts and instead deploy what he calls a non-reductive materialist perspective that studies, quote, how embodiment and embeddedness in time and place enable and constrain diverse and flexible yet patterned subjective experiences that come to be understood as religious. So he's turning the focus away from this sense of religion as a cultural system back to this sense of what religion does in bodies and what bodies do to religious systems through being remade in religious terms. Vazquez's book is the capstone of a real general shift, a more general shift towards engagement with material and somatic facets of religion, and there's lots of examples of this. But one effect of this materialist renaissance in the study of the body of religion that we're exploring in this series is that the body is reframed as a concrete biological entity for sometimes the first time in the work that we're doing, rather than being a repository of ideologies or the byproduct of cultural discourse. As religious studies recenters human bodies, addressing their dynamism and their vulnerability even, there's an exciting opportunity for scholars working on sport to bring their work directly to bear on how we understand somatic conceptions of religion. So to bring authentic and athletic religiosity to the conversation about embodiment significantly enriches the intellectual project. It's not just that there's people thinking about religion in the body, but if actual people who are thinking about religion and sport enter that conversation, we have something really unique to offer to the conversation. In addition then to observing religious bodies bent in supplication or extended in dances of spirit possession or disciplined against worldly pleasures, We can add bodies sweating on the basketball court, feeling the ecstatic percussion when the practice swing of a bat connects with a fastball, and even rising from the canvas after a knockdown punch. That's what I'm interested in. All right, these two different horizons of inquiry then emerge from considering the bodies of athletes. If we start to think about the bodies of athletes as a place for thinking about religion, we go straight to the body. Then we have two different pathways we can take. The first approach takes this already robust scholarly work on discursive processes and thinks about the kind of identity that athletes embody and perform in historical contexts. And it considers the influence of religion on the larger meanings that are impressed on bodies. And for an example of this, I go back to Peter Brown, so those of you who are interested in kind of classicism. Peter Brown says that the Christianization of the Roman Empire dramatically altered meaning attached to the sexual and reproductive capacity of bodies. It also transformed the value attached to bodies trained for feats of physical prowess and devalued athletic bodies. So he says Roman sports and gladiatorial games were shut down when Constantinople was Christianized because Christian opposition existed to the sensualism of bodies displayed in the games. It used to be fine to have gladiatorial games before Christianization. After Christianization, the meaning of the actual bodies that were in the arena was different because of the religious context. So he said, quote, "No longer were the body's taut musculature and its refined poise signs of the athlete and the potential warrior put on display as marks of class status. Egyptian Christians now believe that the shriveled, sterile bodies of monks and virgins caused the valleys to turn green every year." So what people wanted in a Christian idiom was not well-defined, taut, muscular bodies of gladiators. They wanted the kind of emaciated bodies of virgins and monks that were starving themselves. The strongest scholarship in this vein attends to the dynamic nature of religious associations with athletic training, while also recognizing intersections with things like race, gender, class, sexuality, and work. So, in my work, the intersection of boxing and Roman Catholicism offers a particularly vivid example of this dynamic. So I'm going to do just what Peter Brown did. In pre-war American Catholicism, there was a sense of a culture of suffering that valorized experiences of physical distress as conduits for spiritual transcendence. According to this logic, religion cemented the affection of Catholics for boxing because the sport engaged a distinctively Catholic constellation of religious ideas about the experience of suffering, the nature of blood, the body in pain, that permeated Catholic culture. So Catholics experienced boxing and they focused on suffering because they were taught by religious culture to focus on suffering as something important spiritually. By the 1950s, this had changed. By the 1950s, Catholic culture had moved away from its embrace of bodily morbidity and pain as a sign of grace towards an appreciation of robust health, as an indication that Catholics were prepared to do battle against communism and other secularisms in society. In this context, Catholics still embraced the sport of boxing, but they viewed the bodies of fighters through a different interpretive lens than Catholics had even a half-century earlier, focusing less on the physical punishment and bloodshed of the fight and more on the physical prowess exhibited by dominating boxers. So again, it's the same sport, but the meaning of the bodies are read in a very different context as religion changes. Okay, finally, scholarly attentiveness to the body as a site where sport and religion intersect leads to closer appraisals of the embodied experience of athletes themselves, and this is the facet that's completely understudied. After all, both religious ritual and athletic training are forms of bodily practice that embed specific somatic knowledge in muscles and reflexes in memory. So Manuel Vasquez was talking about, and Ariel Kuklich also in the last two talks about training the body for certain kinds of activities. The body can endure pain if it's been culturally trained to do that. And this is exactly what religion does. This is almost exactly what sport does too. Here are these more embodied ways of seeing similarities between the two. Both often are described as modes of bodily discipline. Attending to the athlete's experience of her or his own body presents scholars with specific research challenges, the most insistent being documenting or translating bodily experience into descriptive or interpretive text. And we've talked about this a little bit with our students. How do you write about experiences that are so concretely in the body? How do you find words for this? To do this, scholars have to pay close attention to descriptions and narratives offered by athletes in which they describe their experiences of embodiment. And these findings can be supplemented by data gained through ethnography and sociology, social theorists, and phenomenologists. For all the challenges of this angle of investigation and analysis, it offers the possibility of reframing the relationship of religion and sport in a way that places athletes at the center of the story. And it opens critical and analytical space for studying how religious cultures are made real, how they're achieved, challenged, affirmed, and remade in the physical bodies of religious athletes. Thank you.